You've been taught to be good, haven't you? To play by the rules, to trust that fairness exists, to believe that if you're kind and honest and decent, the world will reward you accordingly. But here you are, watching others climb past you, watching manipulators succeed while you struggle, watching the very people you trusted turn their backs on you when it serves their interests. And you wonder what you're doing wrong. You wonder why your goodness isn't enough. The answer is simple, though it cuts deep. You've been living in a fantasy, and that fantasy has made you powerless. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. He looked at human nature without the rose-colored glasses, without the comforting lies we tell ourselves about inherent goodness and universal fairness. What he saw was raw, uncomfortable truth. People are driven by self-interest. Power dynamics govern every interaction, and those who refuse to acknowledge this reality become victims of it. This isn't cynicism. This is clarity. This is the one mindset shift that separates the powerful from the powerless, the influential from the invisible, the leaders from the led. You see, Carl Jung would tell us that what we refuse to acknowledge becomes our shadow, and that shadow controls us from beneath our conscious awareness. When you refuse to see the power games happening around you, when you insist on believing that everyone operates from the same moral framework you do, you're not being noble, you're being naive, and that naivety becomes the very weapon others use against you. Your unconscious rejection of power dynamics doesn't make them disappear. It just makes you blind to them while others use them to manipulate you. Think about your relationships. How many times have you given trust freely, only to have it weaponized against you? How many times have you assumed good intentions, only to discover you were being played? How many times have you tried to win through merit alone, only to watch someone with inferior skills but superior political awareness surpass you? These aren't isolated incidents. They're patterns. They're the inevitable result of entering a chess game while pretending it's checkers. Let's dig deeper into this unconscious pattern that's been sabotaging you. You learned early, didn't you, that being good meant being safe, that compliance brought approval, that selflessness earned love, that sacrifice demonstrated worth? Perhaps it was a parent who rewarded your giving nature but ignored your needs. Perhaps it was a teacher who praised your cooperation while dismissing your ambitions. Perhaps it was a religious or cultural environment that taught you that wanting power was inherently corrupt, that acknowledging self-interest was shameful, that recognizing manipulation meant you were becoming manipulative yourself. But here's what Jung understood about the psyche. What we push into the unconscious doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness. Your disowned relationship with power hasn't eliminated power from your life. It simply ensured that others wield it over you while you remain unconscious of the very dynamics that determine your fate. You've made yourself psychologically blind to the most fundamental aspect of human interaction, and that blindness has made you controllable. Machiavelli's law isn't about becoming evil. It's about becoming real. It's about understanding that power exists whether you acknowledge it or not, and that choosing ignorance doesn't make you pure. It makes you prey. The mindset shift isn't about abandoning your values. It's about protecting them through strategic awareness instead of naive vulnerability. It's about recognizing that in a world where others will use any advantage against you, your refusal to see reality clearly isn't virtue. It's self-sabotage. Consider the workplace dynamics you navigate every day. There's the official hierarchy, and then there's the real hierarchy. There's what people say in meetings, and then there's what they actually mean. There's the stated company values, and then there's how decisions are really made. You can choose to see only the surface layer, the pretty picture painted for public consumption, or you can develop the psychological sophistication to perceive the undercurrents, the real motivations, the actual power structures that determine outcomes. One approach leaves you constantly surprised by betrayals that were actually predictable moves in a game you refuse to acknowledge. The other gives you agency. Think about that colleague who always seems to know which projects to attach themselves to, which meetings to attend, which people to cultivate. You probably dismiss them as a politician, while you focus on doing good work and trusting that merit will be recognized. But while you're head down in your cubicle, they're building relationships, understanding informal power structures, positioning themselves strategically. They're not necessarily more talented than you, but they understand something you've rejected. Success isn't just about what you do, it's about how others perceive what you do. and perception is shaped by power dynamics. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming who we truly are, but individuation in a social context requires understanding the social game itself. You cannot individuate in isolation from power dynamics because power dynamics are the water we swim in. They're not separate from human nature. They are human nature. Machiavelli didn't invent these dynamics. He simply had the courage to describe them honestly instead of pretending they didn't exist. Your romantic relationships probably follow similar patterns, don't they? You give and give, believing that your generosity will be reciprocated, that your loyalty will be valued, that your selflessness will inspire the same in others. But instead, you find yourself with partners who take your giving for granted, who push boundaries because they know you won't push back, who lose respect for you precisely because you make yourself so available, so accommodating, so predictable. The shadow work here goes deeper than you might initially realize. Your resistance to acknowledging power isn't just about maintaining some idealistic worldview. It's often about avoiding responsibility. As long as you can tell yourself that success is purely about merit, that relationships are purely about love, that fairness naturally prevails, you can maintain the comfortable fiction that your lack of desired outcomes is someone else's fault. The universe is unfair. Other people are corrupt. The system is rigged. But what if the real issue is that you're playing by rules that exist only in your mind while everyone else is playing by the rules that actually govern reality? This avoidance serves a psychological function. It protects you from having to acknowledge your own agency, your own choices, your own responsibility for the patterns in your life. If the world is simply unfair, then you don't have to examine why you keep making the same mistakes. If other people are just corrupt, then you don't have to develop the discernment to choose better people. If the system is rigged, then you don't have to learn how to work within or change the system. But this protection comes at a tremendous cost. It keeps you perpetually victimized by dynamics you refuse to understand. It prevents you from developing the psychological sophistication necessary to navigate complex human relationships successfully. It maintains you in a state of learned helplessness disguised as moral superiority. This is where the mindset shift becomes profound. When you stop expecting the world to operate according to your moral preferences and start seeing it as it actually is, you reclaim your power. Not through becoming manipulative or cruel, but through becoming strategically intelligent. Through understanding that influence, persuasion, timing, positioning, and yes, power are tools that exist in the world, and your refusal to understand these tools doesn't eliminate them. It just ensures they'll be used against you by those who do understand them. Machiavelli observed that it's better to be feared than loved if you must choose between them. But notice the nuance. If you must choose, the ideal is to be both feared and loved, to command both respect and affection. But most people, in their desire to be loved, make themselves neither feared nor truly respected. They become convenient, predictable, controllable. They become resources for others to exploit rather than forces to be reckoned with. You've probably experienced this personally. The friend who calls only when they need something, knowing you'll always say yes. The colleague who takes credit for your ideas, knowing you won't make a scene. The romantic partner who pushes boundaries, knowing you'll accommodate rather than confront. The family member who expects your help but never offers theirs, knowing you're too nice to call them out. These people aren't necessarily evil. They're simply responding to the signals you send about how you can be treated, and those signals are determined by your relationship with power. The unconscious pattern here is the people pleaser's dilemma. By trying to be universally liked, you become universally disposable. By avoiding conflict at all costs, you signal that your boundaries are negotiable. By prioritizing others' comfort over your own needs, you train people to disregard your needs. This isn't kindness. This is self-abandonment disguised as virtue. Let's examine the psychology behind this pattern more deeply. The people pleaser often comes from an environment where love was conditional, where acceptance required self-sacrifice, where being good was the only safe way to exist. Perhaps you learned that expressing your needs led to rejection, that showing strength led to punishment, that asserting yourself led to abandonment. So you developed a survival strategy. Make yourself indispensable through giving, avoid conflict through compliance, earn love through self-sacrifice. But what worked for survival in childhood becomes self-sabotage in adulthood. The very strategies that once protected you now prevent you from forming healthy, reciprocal relationships. The very behaviors that once earned you scraps of approval now earn you contempt from those who recognize weakness and exploit it. Jung understood that our greatest strengths, when unconscious, become our greatest weaknesses. Your capacity for empathy becomes enabling. Your desire for harmony becomes conflict avoidance. Your generosity becomes people-pleasing. Your humility becomes self-diminishment. These aren't inherently negative traits, but when driven by unconscious fear rather than conscious choice, they become the very mechanisms by which others control you. Real power, sustainable, authentic power, comes from understanding these dynamics and choosing your responses consciously rather than reactively. It comes from recognizing that every interaction contains elements of power negotiation, and that your refusal to participate in these negotiations doesn't opt you out. It just means you're negotiating from a position of unconscious weakness. But here's what most people miss about Machiavellian thinking. It's not about becoming ruthless, it's about becoming conscious. When you understand how power works, when you see the games being played, when you recognize manipulation for what it is, you can choose your response strategically rather than emotionally. You can protect yourself and your interests while still maintaining your core values. You can be generous from a position of strength rather than desperate from a position of weakness. The projection mechanism Jung described is particularly relevant here. The very people who claim to be above power games are often the most controlled by them, precisely because they don't see them clearly. They project their own naivety onto the world and then feel shocked and betrayed when reality doesn't match their projections. Meanwhile, those who acknowledge power dynamics openly often behave more ethically, because they understand the consequences of their actions within the actual system, not within some imaginary system where everyone plays by the same rules. Think about the people in your life who have real influence, real respect, real power. Not the people who demand these things through position or volume, but the people who naturally command them. Notice how they operate. They're not cruel or manipulative, but they're also not naive or boundaryless. They understand social dynamics. They recognize power when they see it. They respond to strength, and they don't waste energy on people who don't respect them. They know when to be generous and when to be firm. They understand that some battles are worth fighting and others aren't, and they choose their battles strategically rather than emotionally. These people have what Machiavelli called virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but effectiveness in the practical sense. They have the ability to read situations accurately, respond appropriately, and achieve their objectives while navigating the complex realities of human nature. They don't pretend that people are better than they are, but they also don't assume people are worse than they are. They simply see people clearly and respond accordingly. Consider how differently you might approach your next job interview if you understood it as a power negotiation rather than a merit evaluation. Instead of simply listing your qualifications and hoping for the best, you would research the company's real challenges, understand the interviewer's pressures and incentives, position yourself as a solution to their specific problems rather than just another candidate. You would understand that they're not just evaluating your skills, they're evaluating whether you'll make their life easier or harder, whether you'll enhance their status or threaten it, whether you'll require management or manage yourself. This isn't manipulation. It's intelligence. It's understanding the actual game being played instead of the game you wish were being played. And this understanding gives you the ability to succeed within the real game while maintaining your integrity within it. The same principle applies to your personal relationships. When you understand that attraction isn't just about compatibility, but about power dynamics, you can build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. When you understand that friendship isn't just about loyalty, but about reciprocity, you can invest your energy in people who actually value you rather than those who simply use you. When you understand that family dynamics aren't just about love, but about long-established power structures, you can choose your level of engagement consciously rather than reactively. This is where Jung's concept of the persona becomes relevant. The persona is the mask we wear in social situations, the role we play to fit in and get our needs met. Most people's persona is unconscious. They don't realize they're playing a role, and they don't realize they have choices about which role to play. But when you understand power dynamics, you can choose your persona strategically while remaining authentic to your core self. You can be generous when generosity serves your genuine desire to help, not when it's driven by fear of disapproval. You can be accommodating when accommodation creates genuine harmony, not when it's driven by conflict avoidance. You can be humble when humility reflects genuine self-awareness, not when it's driven by fear of seeming arrogant. The difference is consciousness, knowing why you're making the choices you're making, and ensuring those choices serve your authentic self rather than your unconscious fears. This is the mindset shift Machiavelli offers, from unconscious participation in power dynamics to conscious navigation of them, from being surprised by human nature to understanding and working with human nature, from expecting the world to conform to your moral preferences to finding ethical ways to succeed within the world as it actually exists. But let's address the fear that's probably arising as you read this. You're afraid that understanding power will corrupt you, that acknowledging self-interest will make you selfish, that recognizing manipulation will make you manipulative. This fear itself is part of the psychological programming that keeps you powerless. It's based on the false belief that consciousness corrupts, that awareness destroys innocence, that understanding makes you complicit. But the opposite is true. Unconsciousness corrupts because it allows you to harm others through your blindness. Lack of awareness destroys authentic innocence because it creates false innocence based on denial. Lack of understanding makes you complicit in your own victimization and the victimization of others who depend on you. When you understand how manipulation works, you're less likely to be manipulated and less likely to manipulate others. When you recognize power games, you're less likely to be a pawn in someone else's game and less likely to turn others into pawns in yours. When you see through facades, you're less likely to be deceived and less likely to deceive others. Your unconscious fantasy that goodness alone will protect you is not just naive, it's dangerous. It leaves you vulnerable to those who would exploit your blindness to their advantage. It prevents you from developing the psychological sophistication necessary to protect yourself and those you care about. It keeps you in a perpetual state of confusion about why your relationships and career don't reflect your efforts and intentions. More troubling, it makes you an unreliable ally to those who do share your values. When you can't recognize manipulation, you can't protect others from manipulators. When you don't understand power dynamics, you can't help rebalance power when it's being abused. When you refuse to see reality clearly, you can't make effective choices that serve the greater good. The mature response isn't to become like those who have hurt you. It's to develop the awareness that prevents others from hurting you in the first place. It's to understand that power exists, that it flows through every human interaction, and that your conscious relationship with power determines whether you'll be someone who shapes outcomes or someone to whom outcomes happen. Machiavelli's insight wasn't that might makes right. It was that might makes reality, and ignoring this reality doesn't change it. It just ensures you'll be blindsided by it. The law he revealed is simply this: those who understand power dynamics and respond to them consciously will always have advantages over those who pretend these dynamics don't exist. Think about every major disappointment in your life, every betrayal that shocked you, every time you felt blindsided by someone's sudden change in behavior. How many of these situations involved signs you ignored, patterns you refused to see, power shifts you didn't recognize? How many times did you dismiss your intuition because it didn't align with your preferred narrative about someone's character or motivations? The psychological cost of this willful blindness is enormous. It forces you to live in a state of constant surprise, constantly reactive rather than proactive, constantly playing catch-up to situations that were actually predictable if you'd been willing to see them clearly. It creates learned helplessness because you never develop the pattern recognition skills necessary to anticipate and influence outcomes. But perhaps most damaging, it prevents you from forming authentic relationships based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. Instead, you form relationships based on your projections and fantasies, relationships that inevitably disappoint when reality intrudes. You attract people who are drawn to your unconsciousness because it makes you easy to control, and you repel people who would respect your consciousness because you haven't developed it. So the question becomes, will you continue to live in the comfortable fantasy that fairness naturally prevails, that good intentions are enough, that everyone plays by the same rules? Or will you develop the psychological courage to see the world as it is and learn to navigate it skillfully while maintaining your integrity? Will you remain a victim of dynamics you refuse to acknowledge? Or will you become powerful through conscious understanding of how human nature actually works? The choice is yours. But choosing unconsciousness isn't choosing virtue. It's choosing powerlessness. And in a world where others are making conscious choices about power, Your unconscious approach isn't protecting your morality. It's abandoning your agency. True power comes not from dominating others, but from never allowing others to dominate you. And that requires the one mindset shift Machiavelli discovered: seeing clearly, understanding deeply, and responding strategically to the world as it actually is rather than as you wish it were. This is your moment of choice. Will you continue to be surprised by human nature, or will you finally understand it? Will you keep being shocked by power dynamics, or will you learn to navigate them consciously? Will you remain vulnerable to manipulation, or will you develop the awareness that makes manipulation impossible? The power to change your life lies not in changing the world, but in changing how clearly you see the world that already exists.